This movie covers subtopic 1.4 Sustainability under the main topic of IB ESS Topic 1 Foundations of Environmental Systems and Societies. The significant ideas in this subtopic are: all systems can be viewed through the lens of sustainability. Sustainable development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Environmental indicators and ecological footprints can be used to assess sustainability. Environmental impact assessments play an important role in sustainable development. Let's start with a definition of sustainability. Sustainability is the use and management of resources that allows full natural replacement of the resources exploited and full recovery of the ecosystems affected by their extraction and use. Look at this image. In both the left and center image, fishermen leave enough fish to reproduce and replace those that have been caught. However, in the left image, even more fish could have been caught without disrupting the base supply of fish. The maximum sustainable yield is the maximum amount of fish that can be caught that will leave enough to reproduce and replace the harvest, as seen in the center image. To overfish and catch more than can replenish themselves is unsustainable. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainability means not exploiting the earth beyond what it can support. Leaving Earth unable to recover from development is unsustainable, like in this image of a forest stripped for palm oil in Borneo. So how can we continue to develop in a sustainable manner? Stop the movie and study this graph. What is it telling you about sustainability? Generally speaking, according to this graph, it takes plant communities, illustrated in the dark gray, longer to recover than animal communities in black, or overall ecosystem function in white. Regardless of the ecosystem, this holds true. And it's most disruptive if there are multiple practices damaging the ecosystem. Human practices investigated by this study that disrupt or destroy ecosystems include, but aren't limited to these, deforestation, eutrophication, invasive species, logging, mining, oil spills, overfishing or overhunting also, power plants and trawling. Again, practices that don't allow ecosystems to recover are unsustainable. Sustainable practices include using more energy-efficient products and reducing energy consumption. Likewise, using water-efficient products and finding ways to conserve water. In the design, construction, and operation of new buildings, eliminate the negative environmental impacts and possibly create positive impacts on the climate and natural environment. Initiate and participate in waste reduction and recycling programs. Exchanging the use of fossil fuels for renewable energy and low-carbon fuels. Using efficient transportation, even walking, biking, or carpooling to work. Participating in sustainable land use and management, such as crop rotation in agriculture, and creating more green spaces in urban areas. Finding ways to generate more open spaces, such as parks and forests that work as carbon sinks, areas that trap greenhouse gases that otherwise contribute to climate change. Finally, through education and incentives, regions can activate communities and individuals to engage in sustainable practices. So how do we measure a country's sustainability? You need to be able to discuss how environmental indicators can be used to evaluate the progress of a project to increase sustainability. For example, the MILLENNIUM Ecosystem Assessment. Factors such as biodiversity, pollution, population, or climate may be used quantitatively as environmental indicators of sustainability. These factors can be applied on a range of scales from local to global. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment gave a scientific appraisal of the condition and trends in the world's ecosystems and the services they provide using environmental indicators, as well as the scientific basis for action to conserve and use them sustainably. I will now give some specific examples of sustainability indicators. The information from the following slides is outlined in the 2007 document published by the United Nations, the Indicators of Sustainable Development. One indicator of sustainability is the variety of life that exists in an ecosystem. Protected areas are essential for maintaining ecosystem diversity in conjunction with management of human impacts on the environment. The poverty line indicator, also known as national poverty rate, is a standard measure of poverty, especially income poverty. It provides information on progress towards poverty alleviation, a central objective and requirement of sustainable development. The national poverty rate is one of the core measures of living standards, and it draws attention exclusively towards the poor. Good governance without corruption is essential for sustainable development and is thus an indicator of sustainability. Intentional homicides as well as violent crimes have a variety of significant negative impact on sustainable development. The phenomenon of crime compromises human dignity, creates a climate of fear, and erodes the quality of life. Thus, low crime is also an indicator of sustainability. Health is often dependent on availability, accessibility, and quality of health services. Education, particularly of mothers, access to safe water and sanitation, poverty and nutrition, among other factors. Thus, general health, life expectancy, infant mortality rate, availability of contraceptives, nutrition, etc. are all indicators of sustainability. Lifelong learning is essential to sustainable development. As society shifts towards sustainable production and consumption patterns, workers and citizens who are willing to develop and adopt new technologies and techniques as workers, as well as new attitudes and behavior as citizens and consumers, will be needed. The scale and quality of human resources are major determinants of both the creation of new knowledge and its dissemination. Thus, education is a measure of sustainability. Carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere cause an increase in the global mean temperature, which is expected to have a very negative impact on economic, social, and environmental conditions in most countries of the world. Global warming is a major global challenge to sustainable development. For countries that have committed to reduce or stabilize their greenhouse gas emissions under the Kyoto Protocol of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the indicator also provides information on the fulfillment of this global commitment. The pollution indicator provides a measure of the state of the environment in terms of air quality and is an indirect measure of population exposure to air pollution of health concern in urban areas. Improving both air and water quality is a significant aspect of promoting sustainable human settlements. Again, this list is not comprehensive. I have only shared a few of the indicators of sustainability. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was funded by the United Nations and started in 2001. Quoted from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment website, the objective of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was to assess the consequences of ecosystem change for human well-being and the scientific basis for action needed to enhance the conservation and sustainable use of those systems and their contribution to human well-being. The MA has involved the work of more than 1,360 experts worldwide. Their findings, contained in 5 technical volumes and 6 synthesis reports, provide a state-of-the-art scientific appraisal of the condition and trends in the world's ecosystems and the services they provide, such as clean water, food, forest products, flood control, and natural resources, and the options to restore, conserve, or enhance the sustainable use of ecosystems. One summary of the findings is that, over the past 50 years, humans have changed the ecosystems more rapidly and extensively than in any comparable time period in human history, largely to meet rapidly growing demands for food, fresh water, timber, fiber, and fuel. This has resulted in a substantial and largely irreversible loss in the diversity of life on Earth. I will review some of the specifics of these extensive changes. 60% of world ecosystems have been degraded. About 25% of Earth's land surface is now cultivated. We use 40 to 50% of all available surface fresh water, and water withdrawals from underground sources have doubled over the past 40 years. Here is a summary of how we use our fresh water. And keep in mind that Earth's freshwater resource is finite. It is limited. Over 25% of all fish stocks are over-harvested, which means a quarter of fish are being unsustainably harvested. Since 1980, about 35% of mangroves have been destroyed. About 20% of corals have been lost in 20 years, and another 20% degraded. Nutrient pollution has led to eutrophication of waters and dead coastal zones. Species extinction rates are now 100 to 1,000 times above the background rate. Here you see the extinction rates of vertebrates, birds, and mammals as impacted by humans. Again, these are just a few of the key facts reported in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Some key recommendations from the report were to remove subsidies to agriculture, fisheries, and energy sources that harm the environment. Encourage landowners to manage property in ways that enhance the supply of ecosystem services, such as carbon storage and the generation of fresh water. Protect areas from development, especially in the oceans. The report said that natural resources, food, fresh water, fisheries, timber, air, are being used in ways that degrade them to make them unsustainable for longer term. These natural resources are also referred to as natural capital, and this is how we will refer to them in ESS. Natural capital is a natural resource that can produce a sustainable natural income of goods or services, or it is a resource which has some value to humans. Resources are goods or services that we use. For example, a tree is a natural resource that can produce a sustainable natural income of goods and services, such as cleaning the air and producing oxygen, providing a shield from noise and wind, increasing land value, improving the soil. It can also provide building materials and energy. If a tree is planted, for every tree harvested, then it is a sustainable natural income. Stop the movie and read through all the goods and services provided by trees. This diagram is from the Millennium Ecosystem Report and outlines various sources of natural capital and the goods and services they provide. Stop the movie and study this slide. Renewable natural capital includes living species and ecosystems that use solar energy and photosynthesis, and also non-living items such as groundwater and the ozone layer. Natural income is a yield obtained from natural resources, or the rate of replacement of a particular resource of natural service. This is related to the maximum sustainable yield of a particular resource. Natural income of this forest would be the number of trees that could be cut each year without depleting the overall size of the forest. Also keeping the same number of mature trees on site. You can't have a forest full of saplings or baby trees. This requires planning and proper management of resources. You need to be able to explain the relationship between natural capital, natural income, and sustainability. Natural capital can be used sustainably or unsustainably. If renewable natural capital is used beyond its natural income, this use is unsustainable. Pictured here is unsustainable logging in a boreal forest in the U.S. Can you think of goods and services that have been lost? Obvious will be the consequence of the destruction of habitat and biodiversity. Protected areas can be coupled with areas of sustainable use. This promotes the sustainable use of natural resources, considering ecological, economic, and social dimensions. Use of natural resources at a rate which does not deplete them is sustainable. A sustainable system does not cause long-term harm to the natural capital upon which it depends. For example, contour farming, pictured here, is the practice of tilling sloped land along lines of consistent elevation in order to conserve rainwater and reduce soil losses from surface erosion. Other sustainable systems might use alternative forms to chemical pest control, or they might use aquaculture instead of soil. You need to be able to discuss the value of ecosystems to a society. Ecosystems may provide life-supporting services such as water replenishment, flood and erosion protection, and goods such as timber, fisheries, and agricultural crops. Stop the movie and study these slides again so that you can discuss how ecosystems are of value to society. Be aware that the value isn't simply economical. Listed in both of these images are aesthetic value and maintaining cultural heritage, and also a contribution to human health and well-being. It's clear ecosystems benefit all humans, and all humans benefit from sustainable use of ecosystems. So why don't we live more sustainably then? Why don't we choose to live sustainably? Well, frankly, because changing what we do seems too difficult. Most of us would be willing to change our light bulbs, but how many of us are willing to switch to a vegetarian diet, or an electric car, or take fewer flights, or go car-free? The tragedy of commons is a situation in a shared resource system where individual users, acting independently according to their own self-interest, behave contrary to the common good of all users by depleting or spoiling that resource through their collective action. Each person benefits from taking the resource in the short term, so they continue to do so. But the long-term future of that resource is that there will be none left for anyone. An illustration of the tragedy of commons is pictured here. In Common A, you see a pasture that is used by 4 herdsmen who have differently colored cattle. When each herdsman put only 1 cow in the commons, Common A, the productivity of each cow is 1. For example, 1 liter of milk. When the herdsmen introduce more cattle, Common B, the production per animal is reduced due to the increased population density in the land, but the total production is higher, 6.4 as compared to 4. When the carrying capacity is approached, Common C, individual production is further reduced, and also total productivity is reduced. Each individual herdsman will, however, gain nothing from reducing his stock unless other herdsmen do the same. This is an example of the tragedy of commons. Here is a real-life example of the tragedy of commons. There are many more like it. The Grand Banks are fishing grounds off the coast of Newfoundland. For centuries, explorers and fishermen described this region as home to an endless supply of codfish. In the 1960s and 1970s, advances in fishing technology allowed huge catches of cod. Following a few dramatically large seasons, the fish populations dropped, forcing Canadian fishermen to sail farther to maintain large catch sizes each season. By the 1990s, cod populations were so low that the Grand Banks fishing industry collapsed. It was too late for regulation and management. The cod stocks had been irreparably damaged. Since then, the cod populations have remained low, and some scientists doubt the Grand Banks ecosystem will ever recover. An ecological footprint measures how fast we consume resources and generate waste. It is related to our energy usage, our construction, our timber and paper usage, food and clothing, and the fish we eat. It relates to everyday lifestyle choices we make. An ecological footprint is the area of land and water required to sustainably provide all resources at the rate at which they are being consumed by a given population. Where the ecological footprint is greater than the area available to the population, this is an indication of unsustainability. You need to be able to explain the relationship between ecological footprint and sustainability. What does this image suggest? In 1960, the world's population was living in such a way that it was using the resources of Earth under the carrying capacity. We weren't using up all of the resources of Earth. However, as we moved past the year 2000, we were using resources equivalent to 1.5 times Earth's capacity. What is the impact of using resources more than what Earth has to offer? Is it possible to reduce our ecological footprint? Is it possible to live more sustainably? Is the human population prepared to make changes necessary to live more sustainably? You should be able to see that the more sustainably we live, the lower our ecological footprint is. In Topic 8, we will work with numbers on how to actually calculate ecological footprints. As we continue to develop as a human population, how can we ensure that our development is more sustainable? One method is through environmental impact assessments. Environmental impact assessments incorporate baseline studies before a development project is undertaken. They assess the environmental, social, and economic impacts of the project, predicting and evaluating possible impacts and suggesting mitigation strategies for the project. They are usually followed by an audit and continued monitoring. Each country or region has different guidance on the use of EIAs. EIAs provide decision makers with information in order to consider the environmental impact of a project. There is not necessarily a requirement to implement an EIA's proposals, and many socioeconomic factors may influence decisions. You need to be able to evaluate the use of environmental impact assessment. Here is an example of the impact an EIA can have. The Billund Airport had more than 2 million passengers a year. More than 1,300 homes in Billund were exposed to noise levels above recommended thresholds. In order to reduce the number of homes exposed to noise, the airport proposed the construction of a new runway to the north of the existing runway, amongst other things. Through the requirements resulting from the work with the EIA, it became clear that the same reduction in noise levels could be obtained by changes in the takeoff procedure. From now on, all airplanes that take off from east to west leave the runway as quickly as possible and turn 30 degrees to the right, away from Billund, when they are 150 meters above the Earth. The outcome of the EIA. Both airport and community are happy, right? So they do the expansion, but without a new runway. And a result of that is a reduction of 1,000 homes exposed to noise above the recommended thresholds, doubling the flying capacity, saving 350 hectares of farmland, the preservation of an old Danish forest, a saving of 300 million kroner, or 40.4 million euros in the cost of construction, less environmental impact of the airport without complaints, and the airport has become a member of an environmental network. Again, the positive influence an EIA can have. An example where an EIA failed to make a positive difference is in the case of Shell Oil Company. Shell didn't heed the recommendations of the EIA, and as a result ran into many environmental conflicts during construction of the project, including, but not limited to, the death of salmon before they had a chance to spawn, river crossing problems, and erosion issues. From these examples, you can see that an EIA can have either an effect or not, depending on how the company chooses to respond to the EIA. Criticisms of EIAs include the lack of a standard practice or training for practitioners, lack of a clear definition of system boundaries, lack of inclusion of indirect impacts. Different countries have different standards, and it's difficult to know how far the boundary of the investigation should extend. The Millennium Development Goals were 8 international development goals for the year 2015 that had been established following the Millennium Summit of the United Nations in 2000. Following the adoption of the United Nations Millennium Declaration. All 191 nation member states at that time and at least 22 international organizations committed to help achieve the following Millennium Development Goals by 2015. 1. Eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. 2. Achieve universal primary education. 3. Promote gender equality and empower women. 4. Reduce child mortality. 5. Improve maternal health. 6. Combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. 7. Ensure environmental stability. 8. Develop a global partnership for development. Knowing the indicators for sustainability, how do you think these goals connect with global sustainability? Do you think these are attainable or overly ambitious goals? To follow the success of the MDGs and the ambitions post-2015 development agenda, go to this website titled "We Can End Poverty, Millennium Development Goals and Beyond 2015." This is a summary of topic 1.4. All systems can be viewed through the lens of sustainability. You should be able to understand what sustainability and maximum sustainable yield are. Sustainable development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Environmental indicators and ecological footprints can be used to assess sustainability. There are many indicators for sustainability. The objective findings and recommendations of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. You should be able to discuss and define natural capital, natural income, and how they relate to sustainability. Be able to discuss what ecosystem services are and what the tragedy of commons is. Understand the connection between ecological footprint and sustainability. And understand how the environmental impact assessments play an important role in sustainable development. This ends the movie for IB ESS Topic 1.4, Sustainability, under the main Topic 1 of Foundations in Environmental Systems and Societies. The slides were created by me, Dr. Nina Markham. Images are courtesy of Creative Commons unless otherwise indicated, with a citation under the image. If all images on a slide are from the same source, the source is simply cited at the bottom of the slide. Another resource for you is your IB ESS textbook, whether in hardback form or online, such as Cognity. Thank you for listening.